CD Projekt's ambition may have paid off with The Witcher 1, but that didn't guarantee their future would be smooth sailing. In fact, The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings was very almost cancelled. The Witcher 1's success meant development began on both The Witcher 2 and The Witcher 3 soon after its completion. At the same time, plans were underway to produce a console port of the first Witcher, titled Rise of the White Wolf, through a collaboration with another developer, Widescreen Games. This didn't turn out so well. The project soon required increased funding, manpower and time, and after months of problems, CD Projekt were forced to cut their losses and pull the plug on it. Rise of the White Wolf was a costly mistake, and it came at a bad time. This was when the 2008 global recession was well underway, and it made for a bad period for a game developer to be facing significant economic losses and insecurity. Following the cancellation of Rise of the White Wolf, CD Projekt faced months of uncertainty over their future as they struggled to stay afloat. These circumstances led to a number of things. Firstly, CD Projekt had to cancel another game in development, a first-person shooter they were also working on at the time. They also decided to scrap their progress on The Witcher 2. At the time it was being developed once more on BioWare's Aurora engine, while The Witcher 3 was being made simultaneously on CD Projekt's newly created Red engine. However, financial difficulties meant development on both couldn't continue, and so the then Witcher 2 was discontinued and The Witcher 3 became The Witcher 2 we know today. CD Projekt also had to take action to stay solvent and find a source of income in order to continue development, and that meant selling shares in their company on the stock market. However, this did mean that they were able to fulfill their plans to publish The Witcher 2 themselves in most regions, and so they retained creative control over its development. It was a turbulent time full of hard calls for CD Projekt, but in the end they paid off. The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings was released in May 2011 to very positive reviews and good sales. By the end of its first year on the market, it had sold 1.7 million copies, and sales continued to be strong, helped by the release of a console port, this time handled by CD Projekt themselves and planned from the start. By the end of 2014, combined sales of The Witcher 1 and 2 totaled over 8 million. A huge number for what was once a very niche series. In fact, The Witcher 2 was such a success that the Polish Prime Minister gifted a copy of the game to then President of the United States, Barack Obama.
In fact, the last time I was here, Donald gave me a gift. The video game developed here in Poland that's won fans the world over, The Witcher.
Who later recognized the game as a great example of Poland's place in the new global economy and a tribute to the talents and work ethics of the Polish people. Hey, that's some pretty nice praise coming from the US president. It'd make for a better quote to put on the box than most games can manage, at least. Looking back today, Assassins of Kings seems like a game that was defined by its choices. The huge, game-changing choices that The Witcher 2 offered were the biggest focus for both marketing and reviews. But before taking an in-depth look at these in-game choices and how they play out, it's important to look at the choices CD Projekt made that shaped this game and made it a departure from the original. Perhaps the most important of these was making the game also for consoles and designing it with that in mind. There are lots of differences between The Witcher 1 and 2 as a result, and some of them are certainly for the worse. Firstly, menus are far slower to navigate this time, with information quite spread out, whereas in the first game everything was on a couple of different screens that could be clicked through in no time. Menus may be a small part of a game, but if you want to see the extent of a change, compare picking up and reading a note in both games. If you want an even worse example of the UI impacting practicality, compare swapping signs in combat. Before it was a single button press. Now it takes between 3 and 7, which really puts the brakes on any action happening on screen. The UI improved quite a bit in the third game, and you can't help but think The Witcher 2 was made when CD Projekt was still learning how to design a controller-friendly game. Although it still works, whether playing with a controller or keyboard. Everything is functional, but there is clear room for improvement. Some fans may have been unhappy with the direction the series went in by becoming console-friendly, and you can argue the game was made worse as a result. But this is something that without a doubt helped the series in the long run. It opened up a whole new market and broadened the game's appeal. The limitations it brought were something that, by most standards, were probably worth it. And of course, one thing CD Projekt didn't make sacrifices on was telling the story they wanted to tell. Self-publishing meant that despite financial hardship, the company retained complete creative control, and so could once again make an M-rated game full of sex, blood and profanity. Once more, the dark, monster-infested world of The Witcher could be brought to life in all its adult glory, with its combination of equal parts mature and immature that the first game had established, which ensure this European-inspired fantasy setting still has its own feel. The villagers are full of bigots and drunks, the soldiers are lecherous and rude, and you never have to wait too long to see a pair of tits or some severed limbs. This time around though, that folklore feel of the first game isn't quite so prevalent. There's less quiet moments, and monster slaying often takes a back seat to politics. Rather than being some twisted fairy tale, the story is now an action-packed epic with multiple characters from different countries, all with their own agenda. It's a clear departure from the first game, but less so from the books. Politics and continent-spanning conflicts were a part of the Witcher novels, and so while the tone of the first two games is different, and some people may prefer one over the other, change in itself is not a bad thing. However, there is one big problem with the story of The Witcher 2. It's not very easy to follow. There are so many different characters you're introduced to over this game's not especially long length, and these same characters can have very different agendas and motivations. Before, the story took place in and around one city in one country. Now it spans multiple countries. I hope you know the difference between Temeria, Redania, Edirne, Kedwin and Nilfgaard, because if not, you're going to have a hard time keeping up without constantly checking the game's journal. There are so many names, places and terms that following along can truly be a challenge for first-time players. What's more, you hear of events referred to in the past that include references to the books, the first game, and now also that time between the books and the games that Geralt is starting to remember. It can all seem like a big mess, and I think this game is probably the worst entry point to the Witcher series when it comes to helping newcomers understand what's going on and why. It's a story that most requires contextual knowledge to appreciate and enjoy, but that doesn't mean I don't love the Witcher 2 story. I understand why some may like it less, and I sympathise with anyone who plays the game and gets confused, but I still think it's great. It's a story that the more time I spend with the Witcher universe, the more I enjoy, and it's also a story that greatly benefits from a second playthrough. And luckily enough, this game is designed for more than one playthrough, as the choices you're given really do have a big impact on the game and lead to two very different paths once you finish the first chapter. So why is the story great? Why does it benefit from a second playthrough? What are the consequences of your in-game choices? And how is the gameplay? We'll get to all that and more, but for now let's start at the beginning. Although before going any further, be aware that this video will contain many spoilers for this game, as it looks at the story in its entirety. Also, this video is based off the Enhanced Edition, which was released for free a year after the game's original release, and added a couple extra side quests and cutscenes. The game begins with a great quote on witches to remind you that even if you think they're pretty cool, that's not an opinion commonly held in this world. We're then given a brief introduction to a world of famine, disease and strife, and a country now headed for civil war. We see a flashback to the previous game's opening before waking up in chains in a dungeon. The player's left wondering how this happened, and the guard's dialogue reminds the player of the prejudices people have against witches, just in case you didn't pay attention or don't remember the opening quote from a couple minutes ago. Vernon Roach, the commander of the Temerian Special Forces, arrives and leads you to an interrogation room before one of the game's more infamous lines. In your first moment of control, the player is given a dialogue option which includes the choice, "very funny," which, when chosen, becomes
"fuck you."
The stark differences between lines is immediately jarring. Some games face a problem when they decide to reduce the length of dialogue options presented to the player for the sake of convenience, as doing this risks differences in conversations between what's chosen and what ends up being said. This happens in The Witcher 2 a bit, although generally it's quite rare and dialogue choices presented do adequately reflect what Geralt will say. That's not even what happens here though, because "very funny" and "fuck you" are the exact same length. Nothing was shortened, and there's no reason at all for this difference to exist. It makes for a terrible first impression when the player feels such a disconnect between what they choose to say and then what they hear, particularly for any RPG fan that cares about dialogue options, but this is basically a one-off. That's not to say dialogue choices are amazing in this game. You don't have many options, and Geralt is very much his own character now, which means player agency in conversations is limited as a result. But the problem of choices being poorly communicated isn't a big one, and this is really the only truly bad example. The Witcher 3 has its own memorably misleading option.
"Sorry, can't let that happen." No, my leg!
But this is literally the very first thing many people will do in The Witcher 2, and I have no idea why this wasn't picked up on and changed. It's so obvious it surely couldn't have been an accident. It must have been a conscious decision to make the lines different. Or so I thought. It bothered me so much I downloaded the Polish language pack to check, and in Polish, surprise surprise, this doesn't happen. Geralt says the exact same thing that's selected,
And the shit.
which basically means fuck you. Anyway, as interesting as possible discrepancies between translations may be, that's not meant to be the point of this video, and my main reason for mentioning the first dialogue choice is that while it is misleading and jarring to hear something so different from what you choose, it's not representative of dialogue overall. Following this, the interrogation continues and the player is given more information about what's happening and what the relationship is between Roach and Geralt, who it turns out already know each other. Roach asks Geralt to tell him of the events leading up to this, and you then jump back in time to the day of the assault. Geralt wakes up in a tent next to the naked, slumbering Triss, in a scene that's sure to imprint on the player's mind just how much better character models and animations are now. The upgrade in graphical fidelity is very impressive. This scene is more than just fan service. It's designed to contrast to Geralt's current situation where he's also topless, but instead of being next to a beautiful naked woman he loves, he's instead imprisoned in a dungeon. The bright sunny day, the optimistic attitude in the camp, and the sense of importance that comes with being personally summoned by the king all also contribute to this. Here, life is good, but the player is well aware that this is something that's going to all come tumbling down shortly, and so the player's left wanting to see how this will happen. Or maybe I'm just trying too hard to find a reason to defend the inclusion of tits here. I'll leave that for you to decide. You're given more information on King Foltest and the state of the kingdom, and also told by Geralt that this is the final time he will do something for Foltest, and that regardless of what happens he plans to leave afterwards. This is that one last job before retirement trope that adds to the weight of what we know is going to come. Once you get outside the tent, you're given a chance to appreciate just how much the graphics have improved since the last game. It's more than just breasts that look good here. The environments look fantastic, although the colours can be a little oversaturated at times. Still, the jump in graphics in just 4 years from the first game seems pretty crazy now looking back, and honestly The Witcher 2 still looks great today. For its time it was one of the best looking games out there, and it's great how despite now being designed for consoles, CD Projekt didn't forget their PC audience, and created a game that could take advantage of the PC's extra power. For most people this game also ran really well, so its graphics really do deserve a lot of praise. Before you go meet Foltest, you can explore a little and talk to some of the camp's inhabitants, including the Crinford Reavers, a small band of mercenaries who play a role in one of the Witcher short stories, and here you come across the first important choice in the game. New Boy wants a Witcher's expert opinion on whether a magic amulet will provide him protection to allow him to go into battle with no armour. Choice and consequence are one of The Witcher 2's biggest strengths, but there is a slight problem with this first choice. Depending on what you tell New Boy will determine whether he wears armour. If he doesn't, he'll die and you'll find his body later along with the amulet. If you tell him the amulet may not protect him, he'll don his armour and live, and he'll then help you out later, but you'll only get the amulet if you make certain dialogue choices. The amulet turns out to provide a new side quest in the next chapter. A single playthrough of this game is quite short as RPGs go, probably taking most people around 25 or so hours, and although the level of quality for side quests is generally high, there aren't a large number of them. As a result, losing out on just one side quest is pretty big, and it's unfair on players who give New Boy good advice but don't try to take the amulet from him, particularly as he helps you later anyway in a moment that provides a perfect opportunity for him to give you the amulet as thanks. This leads me into an important thing to consider when looking at The Witcher 2, and something I'll be mentioning several times. There are two ways to view Assassins of Kings. One is on the basis of a single playthrough, and the other is on the basis of multiple playthroughs. It's important to remember that even if The Witcher 2 is designed to have high replay value, it's not designed to need multiple playthroughs. A lot of people will only play an RPG once, and the game is meant to provide a complete and enjoyable experience with just one playthrough, so therefore it's perfectly reasonable to judge the game on that basis. However, as the consequences of your choices have such a big impact on the game, there are a lot of things a second playthrough offers, and a lot of the game's problems are reduced if you do this. Therefore, judging The Witcher 2 on the basis of multiple playthroughs is also perfectly valid. The problem of the amulet side quest being unavailable if you give New Boy good advice but don't try to take the amulet from him may be more punishing than the player deserves, but it's not an issue if you assume the player will replay the game at least once. In that case, it's unlikely the player will miss out a second time, and having some side quests unavailable based on the player's choices makes those choices more interesting and adds weight to your decisions. Also, while we're on the topic of choice and consequence, it's worth mentioning you can import your save from The Witcher 1. This has a few small impacts on the second game, like if you save Tyler you get a package with a message from him in chapter 1, or how you treated the Order will have an impact on their attitude towards you in Chapter 3, and some characters will reference a few choices you make, like Foltest mentioning Ada. You also start the game with your endgame swords and the Raven armor, if you found it at least. These are all small things, but I appreciate them nonetheless, and it's a nice way to reward returning players. It feels surprisingly good to play through the prologue with your old gear looking all stylish. Once you've made your way through the camp, you'll meet the King of Temeria, Foltest. If choice and consequence are this game's greatest asset, then the strength of its characterization is a close runner-up. Enjoyable characters are what's at the heart of the Witcher series. They're so often likeable, entertaining, or just memorable, and if you want to see characterization at its best, you need to look no further than Foltest. The King of Temeria is a bit of a prick. He's arrogant and stubborn, and apparently needs to learn to keep his dick in his pants. But he is a very, very likeable and entertaining prick. He's so easy to get attached to in so little time, and after years of not playing this game, I was amazed how I seem to remember almost all of his lines. His confidence and mannerisms make him seem strangely regal, despite the fact his personality is so different from your typical portrayals of dignified monarchs, often seen in fantasy or medieval history. All in all, as a character he's fantastic, which makes what's going to happen all the more effective. Before we get to that, it's also worth noting how quickly the player is thrown into the world of the Witcher's politics. We're now placed in the middle of a civil war. We meet an emissary of Nilfgaard, and we're introduced to the Crown's uncertain line of succession and Temeria's complicated political landscape. If you don't have a bit of background knowledge of the series, it can be very hard to follow everything that's going on. This isn't a bad thing in itself. The politics are interesting, and the fact there are multiple characters with multiple agendas makes the world more believable and makes the political story the game tells feel more authentic. But it's not very new player friendly, and even for those who have played The Witcher 1 before, there's a lot new, and the story often progresses at a fast pace. Although there is a useful in-game journal, and of course, a second playthrough will allow you to understand everything much better, and likely appreciate details you missed the first time through. That said, I've heard of people getting bored at the start of a game because they don't understand what's going on, which is understandable. As the assault on Lavalette Castle continues, Geralt and Foltest join the battle on the walls, and the player is introduced to combat. The Witcher 2 has what seems to be the most divisive combat in the series. The Witcher 1's combat may get more criticism, and is without doubt more boring, but I think there are more people that hate The Witcher 2's combat. It's also similar to the third game, but different enough to feel unnatural, and make the transition from The Witcher 3 to 2 feel somewhat off-putting. The rhythm-based hybrid combat from the first game is gone, and is replaced by a purely action-based combat system where a single button press corresponds to a single sword swing, and you can now dodge around freely. It works fine, although it can be a little clunky. Targeting isn't very smooth. Variations in your attack animations can lead to inconsistent results, and there's a surprisingly big learning curve to combat. One of the most important parts of this is the backstab system that rewards the player for hitting the enemies from behind, and punishes the player for getting hit themselves that way. It makes a big difference in damage done and received, although there's little visual indication for this beyond watching player and enemy health bars. And I think many new players will get hit from behind and see their health plummet without really understanding why or what they're doing wrong. It's okay when you get used to it, but it means dodging is vitally important and also overly effective, particularly once upgraded to travel further. On higher difficulties you'll be dodging around so much, and possibly so far, that it's painfully obvious that dodging should have been toned down. Something the sequel achieved by putting more focus on strafing, and giving you a quick small dodge in addition to a slower roll. However, in defense of The Witcher 2's combat, this is the game that is most successful at giving the player challenging fights that feel rewarding to overcome. Enemies are less bullet spongy than in 3, and fighting for a difficult encounter using your moveset to the best of your ability and barely scraping through the fight thanks to having mastered the combat system can feel pretty good. Attacking and dodging itself may be clunkier and worse looking than in 3, but there is still enjoyment to be found in mastering the basics and utilising the extra tools available to you in this game. Those extra tools I'll talk more about later. For now, let's return to the story. You continue fighting your way along the walls until you reach Arian Lavalette, eldest child of Baroness Lavalette, who you either have to fight or persuade to stand down. Roach then interrupts Geralt's retelling of the story to comment on your decision, and once Geralt begins again, you skip forward to further along on the day of the assault. Triss and Roach are now present, and Foltest's forces then encounter a dragon. You then have to dodge its flaming attacks as you try to get to safety. The game's attempt to provide a cinematic experience here is visually impressive but plays fairly awkwardly, and you'll probably find yourself being burnt to death at least once before you realise what you're meant to be doing. Geralt's story continues as he and Foltest continue into the town to try and find the children Enace and Boosie Lavalette, who Foltest believes to be biologically his, making them potential heirs to the Temerian crown. You work your way through the town where you can interact with a few soldiers to intervene in their mistreatment of civilians, before you fight your way through what remains of the Lavalette resistance. After a few challenging fights, you'll reunite with Foltest and make your way to the temple. From here you continue onwards to the Solar to find the children, but not before another run-in with that pesky dragon. This time you'll have to go through some quick time events, and here you'll probably notice just how different this game's approach can be from its predecessor. Quick-time events are a contentious feature in many games, but are perhaps even more so in an RPG that previously had quite an old-school feel to its gameplay. It seems Cedar Projekt even guessed some might dislike them as there's an option in-game to make them impossible to fail, but that didn't stop there being some fan backlash where quick-time events were cited as a complaint, which I think had less to do with how negatively they impacted the game and more because of what they represented, i.e. a step in a different direction for the series that some people didn't want to see the game take. And there's definitely a sense that the developers weren't sure exactly what game they wanted to make with The Witcher 2. It's like they wanted it to be both a hardcore RPG and a cinematic action-packed adventure with a modern feel to it. It results in a slight identity crisis at times. For example, there's a detailed combat logging game, but it's hidden away from most players' eyes as it's turned off by default. There's a few stealth sections, but they're so basic you have to wonder why they bothered to include them. And then there's the quick-time events during cutscenes or boss fights, which happen rarely enough that when they do appear they'll probably take you by surprise, making them more frustrating than they should be. The reason for their inclusion is clear though. They're the easiest way to actively involve the player in the action during scripted events, but they still feel out of place and annoying, and it's no surprise they were done away with in the sequel. Anyway, the dragon proves no match for a well-timed button press, and so you escape, albeit at the cost of your silver sword. Unless you imported your save, in which case your sword magically appears in Geralt's hand the second the cutscene is over. As you climb the tower, Geralt asks Foltest's permission to leave after the battle, which Foltest accepts, just to remind the player how close Geralt was to getting to walk away from everything. You find the kids and it seems everything's turned out okay and nothing can go wrong. Right? Nah, the foreshadowing leading up to this makes that pretty obviously untrue, but it's still a good cutscene.
Go, Boosie.
That's not my father.
But it is your king, boy.
The improvements in graphics from the first game are huge, but the overall increase in the level of presentation is even more impressive. Cutscenes were often where The Witcher 1 looked its worst, with poorly delivered lines and clunky animations both being common occurrences. Not so anymore. Cutscenes are top quality now and have a good amount of style, with a variety of camera shots, good use of music, and even faces that look like humans and have proper animation now. And in moments like these, that step up in quality is easy to appreciate, and even though you know it's coming, this moment still leaves an impression. Meet Letho of Gullet, the titular assassin of kings, who makes his escape after taking Foltest's life with a jump that could put an Assassin's Creed protagonist to shame, leaving Geralt standing over the king's corpse as the guards arrive too late to see what truly happened. Roach now knows the whole story, and after some more talking about politics of the now troubled Temeria, he leaves, but not before handing Geralt a key so he can later escape. Here we also get the first of several flashbacks to Geralt's previously unknown past, which explain the time between the end of the books and the start of the first game. This is a story that interconnects with the main quest, providing Geralt with another motivation for pursuing Letho beyond just his attempt to clear his own name. Geralt is returned to his cell, but he doesn't have to wait long before he gets a chance to make his move. One fistfight later and you have your freedom, but you now have to sneak your way out of the dungeons. This is the first stealth section and also the hardest, though you can fight your way through instead. There's actually at least a little bit of depth to this first stealth section. You can use Ard to blow out torches to allow you to move in the dark, and some prisoners will alert guards unless you calm them with Axii. You'll still likely end up fighting everyone though, and while stealth sections in non-stealth games are rarely very enjoyable, it's at least nice that you have to work a bit for your freedom. If a game starts with the player as a prisoner, then escaping should require some effort, instead of you just being bailed out in a cutscene. Sneaking through the prison may be clunky from a gameplay perspective, but this stealth section at least feels appropriate to the story. Inside the dungeon you can meet Arian Lavalette again if you convinced him to surrender, or if he died you'll meet Baroness Lavalette herself instead. Whichever you meet will also be a prisoner, and helping them provides an opportunity to escape the dungeon. Outside you find New Boy, either alive or as a corpse, and if he's still living he'll provide a distraction for you so you can avoid an extra fight. You find Roach, who's accompanied by Triss and Roach's unit, the Blue Stripes, and you then make your exit by boat up the Pontar River, following the trail of the Scoia'tael commander Iorveth, who Roach believes may be linked to the assassination after learning that the Scoia'tael who matched Iorveth's men's description were seen assisting the Kingslayer's escape. Triss and Geralt head below deck, but not before Geralt asks her about Yennefer, in a moment that lets fans know that perhaps in this game she won't just stay forgotten, and so ends the game's prologue. Chapter 1 opens with a flashback, introducing Iorveth that shows him meeting Letho for the first time 4 months earlier. We then return to the present, with Geralt and company arriving outside Flotsam, a river outpost deep in the forests of the Pontar Valley. Before entering Flotsam, Iorveth appears and gives the player a refresher course on human vs elf conflict, outlining the motivations of the non-human resistance group, the Scoia'tael, who then attack you, forcing you to fight your way through to the Flotsam garrison. Once you make your way to the middle of the town, you'll find some familiar faces, the returning characters and friends of Geralt, Dandelion the Bard and the dwarf Zoltan, who are standing on a scaffolding with rope around their necks, minutes from being hung. The timing is incredibly convenient, as is them being here in the first place, but I'd be lying if I said it isn't nice to see them again. Geralt tries to defuse the situation with his fists, and then the commandant of Flotsam, Bernard Verido, intervenes. He puts on a bit of a show, hanging 2 elves and blaming the Scoia'tael for the killing of Foltest, before telling the villagers to ready themselves for more conflict. But he does agree to let Dandelion and Zoltan go before asking Geralt to meet him later at his estate.
There's one more thing. Welcome to Flotsam, Witcher.
You then head to the inn to enjoy a drink with old friends. Dandelion's character is a bit more of a caricature of his book self this time around, something that worsens in the 3rd game, but he's still likeable, mostly. It's also strange how Zoltan becomes such an important character to Geralt in the game, when his role in the books is quite small. But again, he's likeable enough that seems unimportant, and this time around at least his face doesn't look like something out of a nightmare. It's nice to speak with both of them. These moments are important in the series. They provide a break from the action and make for a nice light-hearted change to the seriousness of the world and the main story. In fact, The Witcher 2 may have benefited by having a few more of these moments, as once the story gets going it moves at a pretty fast pace that doesn't always give the player much time for a breather. For now though, you are finally into the game properly. You can explore Flotsam and take part in other classic RPG pastimes, like picking up side quests, or going through every single building in town and meticulously robbing it of every item you find inside. Flotsam's great. It's detailed and lively, although its inhabitants seem a bit odd. I don't know why some of these guys don't wear any trousers. I guess it's fashion. Peasant fashion. To not wear trousers. Hey, who am I to judge? And things only get weirder as you look around more.
A day like any other.
I like this place though. I think it's the trees. There's something about a settlement surrounded by such huge trees that just satisfies some fantasy desire of mine. And the graphics are great, facilitated in part by these double-doored sections that hide the need for a loading screen. You also rarely get to see too far into the distance thanks to some clever world design, but the results are some very detailed environments for you to walk through and admire. Flotsam also gives you the chance to do the most important thing in the game, which is getting a haircut, so you don't have to look at that damn ponytail anymore. There's also some side activities to do. The fist fighting and dice minigames from the first Witcher return. Somehow, the dice game feels far more clunky despite its fancy dice physics. Thank you whoever decided the one thing missing from the dice game was having your dice roll off the table if you moved the analog stick even slightly too fast. As for fist fighting, it's just a sequence of QuickTime events, but it can be worth doing just to hear the character introductions.
Who's that? Tidy Tib. The bastard eats honey straight from the hive, drinks for 4, and some say he can hang a bucket full of water from his cock. You better get a solid coin pouch ready.
You can also arm wrestle now, which seems a little unfair. You're a mutant with superhuman strength, and you're arm wrestling malnourished peasants. I don't understand why these people act surprised when you easily win. Anyway, these minigames are all shallow, but they help add some flavour to the world at least. Exploring Flotsam is also where you'll learn of something very annoying in The Witcher 2. Item weight. Inventory management was bad enough in the last game, so I guess the developers thought, why annoy the players only slightly with limiting the number of items they can hold, when we can annoy them greatly by making them constantly have to manage item weight. Almost everything you pick up has a weight, and most crafting and alchemy ingredients are things you'll never find a use for, but you'll still pick them up because how could you know how useless they are? And even if they don't have much use, they'll still be weighing you down. Item weight should only be added to a game if it adds to immersion or has some beneficial gameplay reason, like forcing you to plan your resources ahead of time. Here it does neither, but if you get used to selling or stashing things regularly, I guess it's not so bad. The side quests to do here are good, although there isn't that many of them. They often provide more world building and involve some choice, with some having multiple solutions. For example, in the Claws of Madness, you investigate a burned down hospital while looking for 2 missing people. At the hospital you can find some interesting notes on past patients, such as on someone who claimed to be abducted by the Wild Hunt, and you can learn a bit more about the past war with Nilfgaard, providing a natural introduction to some of the game's lore. When you do find the 2 missing people, you learn how they played a part in the hospital's past, and tortured a Nilfgaardian soldier to try and find some treasure, and then killed a priest who complained, which caused a riot amongst the patients, leading to all but one of them being killed. The Nilfgaardian soldier's ghost is now back for revenge, and you can give it to him by taking the 2 guilty men to see him, or you can let them go. If you let them go, you can try to trick the ghost into believing that you killed them. If you make the effort to go to a butcher and get a pig heart and eyes, you successfully trick the ghost, but if you only use a necker's heart and eyes, he sees through it and attacks you. After dealing with the ghost, you can also decide whether to let the 2 guilty men go or report them to the authorities, where you find out the last surviving patient of the hospital is in fact Bernard Laredo's mother. It's a great quest with lots of choices and lots to learn. Other memorable side quests have you helping or killing an alcoholic troll, and intervening between the guards and an elven woman suspected of helping the Scoia'tael. Most quests in the game are connected to the main story. However, before you can continue tracking the Kingslayer, you need to deal with something else. Flotsam, it turns out, has a monster problem. A pretty big monster problem. The town's ships are being terrorised by a Kairan, which the mage Sela de Tanzaville has already agreed to take care of, and so Geralt agrees to help. You investigate the creature's appearance and search its lair. You then get a chance to prepare for the fight, where you're advised to brew a specific potion to protect against the creature's poison, before you and Sheila finally do battle with the beast. Now is a good time to talk about some of the other parts of combat, such as preparation, potions, and signs. These were an important part of combat in the last game, and they continue to be so here. The philosophy of needing to know your enemy and prepare for fights remains, but there are some changes. Firstly, buffs from oils and potions feel less important overall, as combat is more action-oriented, and so dodging will now always be the most important factor governing the player's success. Secondly, the duration for these buffs has been greatly reduced. They're now only 5 to 10 minutes, they only last for 1 or 2 fights. Making and consuming potions is quite a lengthy procedure that involves going through several slow menus and watching another slow drinking animation. You're also no longer allowed to use potions in combat. You have to use them beforehand, and this, when combined with the time they take to consume, makes them often not feel like they're worth using. After all, it's hard to know exactly when you're going to need them, and the effort they take to use means you're unlikely to regularly use them preemptively. This would be far less of a problem if the duration of potions were longer. Just doubling their durations would be all that's needed to make them feel more worthwhile. The idea of forcing the player to prepare for fights beforehand is great, but it doesn't work well with potions here because they're too slow to use, last too little time, and the game doesn't communicate to the player when they'll be needed effectively enough for the player to know when it's worth using them. Even here at the Kayron fight, when you have a whole quest to do with brewing a specific potion, I still didn't use the potion, or any others here, because I didn't remember when the cutscene that puts you into the fight starts, and so I didn't get a chance to use anything. The game then autosaves, and as I didn't manually save beforehand, I had no option to use anything beyond loading a save 15 minutes ago. Even at the most scripted encounter in the game, preparing beforehand didn't work because the game didn't tell me when to use a potion, and I tried to wait as long as possible so my potion didn't run out before the fight had started. Not that it changed much in the fight, as potions aren't that important anyway. Oils and bombs also exist, and they're fine. Unlike potions, oils can be used in combat, and bombs are an effective means of doing AoE damage or crowd control. But potions are meant to be one of the most important tools of a Witcher, and so their poor implementation is a shame. The other thing that's changed are signs. They may seem pretty similar, however in The Witcher 1 you could change signs instantly with a single button press, and now you have to go for a slow menu that takes multiple inputs. This discourages the player from swapping between signs, particularly swapping back and forth as needed in a fight, because doing so is way too slow. So this change encourages you to pick one sign and only use that, something that the quite restrictive level up progression system also encourages. And one sign has been changed and is now better than anything else in most scenarios, so you'll probably realise that and never change signs again. That sign is of course Quen, which is a godsend on higher difficulties. You just use it at the start of a fight, and again if you're ever hit, to provide a near permanent shield. Doing this is boring, but incredibly effective. The duration of Quen should have been made way shorter to balance this. It's a simple fix, but it would help a lot at making other signs more viable. Anyway, back to the Kayron fight. This is a visually really impressive boss fight, but that's about it. This encounter is very much style over substance. You dodge its tentacles and use Yarden or traps to stun them to then be able to damage and cut them off. After you kill 3 tentacles, there's a quick time event that if you fail you have to start the fight over. After this, part of the bridge falls on the Kayron and you have to do something specific. You may think that now the boss is trapped, you should hit it in its red glowy area that looks just like the spot you used to damage the tentacles. But no, running towards the boss just kills you for some reason. You may then think that you're meant to hit the tentacles on the ground. That's how you damaged it before after all. Again, no. Even though you can stand next to them and swing your sword into their model, there is no hit detection and you'll do no damage. Instead, you just walk up a section of the fallen bridge, and then Geralt will automatically do some leaping action hero moves and blow the boss up Michael Bay style. It's incredibly easy if you know what the game wants you to do, but if you don't, it's very punishing. I'm not sure why they didn't just give Sheila a line telling Geralt to climb onto the bridge or something. But this isn't a series with good boss fights anyway, and I still like this fight even if only for the great visual spectacle of fighting something so large. With the monster slain, you can turn your attention to Flotsam's other main problem, the Scoia'tael. After you meet Laredo at his estate, he'll ask you to capture Iorveth, and regardless of whether you wish to do this, Iorveth is your only lead on finding the Kingslayer. So with help from Triss, she and Geralt interrogate a captured elf who tells you Letho attacked the Scoia'tael and intends to betray Iorveth. In this conversation, Geralt also remembers more of the past, including how after he and Yennefer were saved by Ciri, the Wild Hunt came and took Yennefer away. Geralt learns of the presence of a rose that could help restore more of his memory, and so you and Triss go to a ruined elven bathhouse. They find the rose before falling down into the baths below, where they get trapped and do what everyone does when trapped somewhere. Magically strip naked and start having sex. And this may seem like just fan service, but actually, the writers are reminding you what Triss's nicely shaped breasts look like, so that you care more about what happens next. It's all planned. This is very important to the plot. When that's over, Geralt goes to talk to Zoltan about finding the Scoia'tael, who sets up a meeting where you get a chance to talk to Iorveth, in a conversation that is surprisingly easy to get yourself killed in by choosing the wrong dialogue options. I guess learning to not talk back to people aiming arrows at you is a good lesson to teach the player. If you do choose the right options, Geralt will convince Iorveth he's telling the truth about Letho, and the two of them will then go to confront Letho and get some answers. Letho proves Geralt right, but a fight breaks out between the Scoia'tael and the Blue Stripes. You have an important choice in whether to give Yorvith his sword or instead help Roach, and we'll come back to this because no matter which you choose you'll end up fighting Letho in the bathhouse below. This boss fight is infamous for its difficulty. No matter what difficulty you play on, this will likely be a big spike, and so many players struggle and get frustrated here. You also once more may forget to use potions before and then end up wanting them. However, I like this fight for a number of reasons. Depending on what you choose later, this may be the only time you fight Letho in the game, and its inclusion is therefore important to prevent choosing to not fight Letho at the end of the game from feeling too anticlimactic. This is basically a mirror fight. You're both witches and Letho uses the exact same abilities Geralt uses, so it's nice to have a 1v1 fight against an equal. In fact, it's the only big Witcher vs Witcher fight in the series. The way Letho uses his abilities feels like a deliberate reminder to the player that you also have these abilities. It's like he's showing you how to play. You may not have used Quen before this fight, but I bet you will now you've seen how annoying it is to fight against. I also love when you both use Ard at the same time and knock each other back. It really captures the feeling of fighting against an evenly matched opposition. However, while this fight is challenging, I'm not sure I'd describe this as a great fight from a gameplay perspective. Playing on hard, the only way I've ever completed it is using Ard to get some guaranteed hits in before dodging away and then repeating the exact process over and over and over. To be a great boss fight, using other methods should feel at least viable, like using Quen or traps. That said, this is still my favourite fight in the entire series. Letho is one roided up son of a bitch, and this fight just feels very cool. Seeing his huge health bar be slowly depleted may be demotivational, but once you get him to just under half HP the fight stops, and a cutscene plays where Geralt loses but Letho spares him, saying how Geralt once saved him and how this makes them even. Some people may dislike winning a boss fight and then seeing their character lose in a cutscene, but it seems fitting to me because I've always felt if I had to deplete his entire health bar, I'd have probably lost anyway. Things now play out differently depending on who you chose to help before the fight started. Whoever you helped will arrive and you'll then head to Flotsam to try to find Triss. If you helped Roach previously, the earlier skirmish will have ended with Scoia'tael defeat, and so when you get to Flotsam you'll see signs of celebration as Loredo has organised a commemorative feast. You search Sheila's room to find it trashed with no sign of her or Triss. You then find a local villager who tells you of a conversation she overheard between Triss and another mage, Deathmold. If you instead helped Yorvith earlier, then the Scoia'tael won the skirmish, and instead of being a scene of celebration, Flotsam is burning and non-humans are being slaughtered in an attempt to root out any and all Scoia'tael supporters. You have a chance to intervene in some of the conflicts, but not to reverse what's already happened. You once more look for Triss, talk to a different villager, and are told of a conversation involving Triss, but this time it's with the sorceress Philippa Eilhart. In both choices you then continue to search for Triss, and learn that Letho succeeded at capturing her and forcing her to teleport them both to near the dwarven town of Vergen, further along the Pontar River. Before you set off in pursuit, you have to choose between helping Roach or the Scoia'tael, in a decision that will completely change how the rest of the game plays out. This is the main choice of the game. Similarly to in The Witcher 1, you're asked to choose between helping the Scoia'tael and helping a group opposed to them, but this time there is no neutral option. Roach and Yorvith are both likeable, and in this game you aren't choosing who to ally to, but more who to help temporarily as a means to an end, making the removal of a neutral option more understandable. This is, however, the same moral choice of the first game. It asks the player the same question: do you want to support or oppose the Scoia'tael, knowing their cause is somewhat sympathetic, but their actions can be negative? Roach does present a more pragmatic option than the Order of the Flaming Rose ever was though. Whether to support or oppose the Scoia'tael is an interesting moral question. The first time I played the game I felt more drawn to one side, and years later I feel more drawn to the other, and I think that shows it's both a complex and personal dilemma, which is exactly what moral choices in RPG should strive to be. Despite this, I do think this choice is made slightly less interesting by being so similar to what's seen in the first game. However, the important part of this is less about the choice and more about its consequences. I'll go over both paths to show just how different they are. If you choose to help Roach, you'll find out Loredo has made a deal to support Kedwin and betrayed Temeria, and therefore needs to die. You formulate a plan to infiltrate his estate in another stealth section. You find Loredo's mother, who makes the bad decision to try and attack Geralt, and it's worth doing this mission just to see this moment. If decapitating old ladies isn't enough incentive for you, then you also get the satisfaction of finally fighting Loredo. He doesn't put up much of a challenge, but to his credit the guy sure can take a beating. You then fight your way free and meet up with Roach. He tells you of his meeting with Yorvith, where the two fight in a battle that puts you in control of whomever you sided with, and lets you decide who wins the encounter, although the result doesn't actually change anything. And before leaving, I have to at least mention this moment. During this conversation, one of Roach's men says,
"I'd never touch a she-elf."
And then you get a random QuickTime event in the middle of the conversation with no further indication of what it does. Of course, when I saw this I instinctively pressed X, because years of playing games have conditioned me to always press buttons shown when prompted by QuickTime events. I didn't actually want to hit the guy though. Really, I didn't even think about it, it's just an automatic reaction to press the button the game tells me to press. I think using QuickTime events suddenly in normal conversations is going a bit far. They could have just used a timed dialogue choice like what's already used in the game. Nitpicking aside, you then board Roach's ship and head to Vergen. If you instead choose to help the Scoia'tael, you assault the prison barge that's docked in Flotsam to free those being held there. Interestingly, if you help Roach previously when talking to Lefo with Yorvith, and then go on to help the Scoia'tael, Yorvith will be captured on the barge, and this mission is slightly different. Both ways have the same consequence though. You capture the prison barge, free those aboard, and have the choice to save some she-elves from Loredo's men, and then set sail, leaving Loredo alive and still in charge of Flotsam. Thus ends Chapter 1. Chapter 2 begins with a change of perspective to Henselt, the King of Kedwin if you sided with Roach, or to Stennis, Prince of Edan if you sided with Yorvith. The nation of Kedwin is preparing to invade northern Edan, a country weakened after the assassination of its king by Lefo, as seen in the opening CGI movie. Whomever you control will meet the other in a pre-war conversation that you get to shape, but will culminate in the same outcome. I have to say there's something strange about controlling a character you don't know and then picking dialogue options. This isn't your character. How would you know what choice they would make in a conversation, and why do you get to decide? I know the answer is to try to make this scene more interesting and engaging for the player, but nevertheless there's something that feels very odd about it, like it's breaking some unspoken narrative rule by giving you a choice that shouldn't be yours. That said, when playing as Henselt, I love that you can challenge Saskia to a duel and then actually win. It made me like Henselt slightly in a way I never would have without this part. I knew the guy had balls, but it's surprising to see he can back it up, at least when the player is the one in control. Although whether you control him or not doesn't stop him bashing the head in of a nearby priest in a fit of rage. An action that acts as a catalyst for awakening a blood curse that rouses the spirits of those who once fought in a battle that took place in the valley you now stand. This causes the Kedweni camp and the Edan side to be separated by a deadly ghost-infested mist that brings the conflict to a standstill. Geralt will arrive with Roach on the Kedwen side, or with Yorvith on the Edan side. You're now dumped into the middle of the conflict and tasked with ending the curse, as you try to find information on Triss and Lefo's whereabouts. This chapter is completely different depending on which path you previously chose. You'll either do quests in the Kedwen war camp or in the dwarven town of Vergen. You'll also get a chance to know different characters. On Roach's path you'll work with the sorcerer Deathmold and reunite with Sheila, while also trying to help King Henselt. On Yorvith's path you'll meet the sorceress Philippa Eilhart, Prince Stennis, and the local folk hero and supposed dragonslayer Saskia. The differences between which path you choose are really impressive, and being able to play through both sides of this conflict is interesting. This is something that requires multiple playthroughs to appreciate though. On a single playthrough there are a few problems. Firstly, it's very difficult to understand everything that's going on. You're thrown straight into the middle of a political dispute between two sides you probably aren't familiar with, and the curse itself can seem quite unclear. Secondly, if you only play one side, you miss all the character development of the other side. You'll not get a chance to meet or spend much time with several characters that go on to be important. This can make some things that happen harder to understand, and also make some characters far less interesting. It's particularly a problem with Saskia and Philippa in Chapter 3 if you choose Roach's path, but I'll come back to that later. Anyway, as you get into the chapter fully, you'll get new places to explore and new side quests to do, all of which are different depending on the side you find yourself on, and both sides are interesting. The Kedweni side does a good job at creating an authentic feeling war camp full of anxious and overconfident soldiers waiting for the battle to start. I like how the main quest has you investigating a conspiracy amongst the soldiers, and when talking to different soldiers you'll see a range of different opinions and loyalties towards Henselt, Deathmold, and the previously burned alive sorceress, Sabrina Glessovic. Different people think different things for different reasons, and it really helped make the camp feel more believable. There's also the quest to help Odrin.
That's right, I'm the fucking only man. The only one, get it? That's me.
Shut up, Odrin.
Which is worth doing just to see Geralt's frustration.
Aha! See, I'm going to take me a nap right here.
Odrin, stop fucking around and get up.
Vergen, on the other hand, gives you the chance to drink with dwarves, who may be able to hold their liquor a lot better than Odrin, but it's still a good time. The Dwarven town also looks fantastic. This place has a great atmosphere, and you'll probably be more attached to it by the time you get around to leaving. Regardless of what side you're on, you'll have the same core objectives, but they'll play out completely differently. On the Kaedweni side, your investigation of the curse leads you to finding out about Sabrina Glessovic's death, as well as uncovering a loyalist conspiracy within the Kaedwen ranks who think Henselt is conspiring with Nilfgaard. You recover a number of artifacts that are needed to lift the curse, and along the way find out from Roach that the Nilfgaardians have captured Triss. You head to the Nilfgaardian camp, and by the way, can someone teach the people of the Witcher universe how to use doorways properly, and that it's rude to shut the door in someone's face? This happens more than once. You get to the Nilfgaardian camp too late, so maybe the Blue Stripe should have spent more time training how to use a goddamn door. You do however find out the Nilfgaard's destination, Loch Muin, but before you can go there yourself you still have a curse to solve. You free Henselt of the curse's grip after a puzzle that could have really done with being sped up a little bit. Once that's done, you return to the camp to speak to the king, but while doing so you're interrupted by some cat-eyed assassins. They prove no match for Geralt, who kills one and forces the other to flee. After Deathmold's necromantic autopsy/hallucination, you get some more information about Leffo, who it turns out is working with Sheila de Tanseville, who has also recently fled to Loch Muin. You continue the vision and find the location of their hideout, which you then head to. Here you speak to the injured assassin whose wounds prove fatal, but the conversation helps Geralt remember how he once pursued the Wild Hunt after they had taken Yennefer. You then solve the curse by using magic and the recovered artifacts to travel into the Mist, where Geralt is possessed by the spirit of one of the old battle's commanders. He then changes the course of the battle by defeating the other commander, whose spirit has manifested as a powerful archwraith known as a Draug. After this boss battle the curse is lifted, and the ordeal knocks Geralt unconscious, but not before he remembers another part of his past, where during his pursuit of the Wild Hunt he met and saved Leffo from a monster. Geralt wakes up a few days later where he meets Dandelion. He's informed that the mist has lifted and Kaedwen's army has already begun its attack on Vergen. Henselt has found out about the conspiracy against him, which it turns out Roach is involved in. In retaliation for Roach's part, Henselt kills all his men and rapes Vess.
I'll kill the Horsens. Every last one.
When Roach finds this out, he loses it and swears revenge, and Roach's character development in this chapter is great. He's a lot more sympathetic once you've seen this, but you'll also know partly it's his fault. His willingness to play with fire was risky, and as a result, he got burnt. Geralt and Roach then head to Vergen, where they believe Sheila and Leffo are located. Using a secret path you learned of earlier, you avoid most of the fighting, but come across an ambush set by Deathmold.
You'll pay for my people, you whore's son, for each and every one of them.
You fight your way through, but Deathmold escapes. You arrive at Vergen to find the battle still raging. Here you're too late to find Sheila and Leffo, but you do find Henselt. You defeat his men and then defeat him, and then it's up to you whether you'll let Roach get his revenge or not. Your decision will affect whether Henselt is in Chapter 3, and affects the fates of Edirn and Kaedwen. Although, as The Witcher 3 proves, you'll only change the course of history temporarily. Still, seeing him die feels pretty satisfying.
I am Henselt of Ardcarreg, the last of the unicorns. I won't beg for mercy.
Look me in the eyes.
Go on! Take your revenge!
A flea has bitten a lion.
Geralt and Roach then leave for Loch Muin, and by the end of the chapter the two no longer feel like just two people working together out of necessity, but instead actual friends who have been through some shit together, and Roach seems both more flawed and more likeable. If, however, you choose to help Yorvith earlier, you'll spend this chapter on the other side of the mists. You'll still solve the curse in a similar way, but you'll also be tasked by Philippa to find a cure for Saskia after she gets poisoned. Instead of deciding whether to kill Henselt, you'll get a different chance to shape the future when Prince Stennis is accused of being the poisoner, and you can investigate whether he is guilty in a quest with lots of information for the player to uncover and an impressive amount of variables. It will ultimately end with you either letting the peasants lynch Stennis or trying to persuade them to give him a fair trial, which you will only succeed at if you uncover enough evidence. Don't feel too bad if you fail to stop them though, because he is guilty. You take a trip across the mists to get Henselt's blood and find what happened to Triss. Here you'll also learn that even if you sided with Yorvith, Roach is still a pretty cool guy, as he's still willing to save your ass. Thanks, Roach. Once you return to use Henselt's blood to heal Saskia, you can then lift the curse in a similar manner as before. You also find out similar information about Lefo and Sheila for a harpy crystal that contains dreams, and also there's important character development for Philippa and her apprentice Cynthia. This isn't just fan service, it's all planned. Cynthia is actually a Nilfgaard spy who you find out betrays Philippa. You and Philippa didn't suspect her because you two were too busy enjoying her assets. It's all planned. This is quality storytelling, definitely, not just fan service.
My favourite type of magic, lesbomancy.
Once the curse is lifted, Geralt wakes to find Henselt is about to attack Vergen, but this time you get to join in the defense. Here The Witcher 2 does its best Lord of the Rings impression, with its attempt at an epic siege defense and reinforcements turning up at the last second. Some people may like this section, but I don't. I hate when games try to make a siege or big battle as an epic set piece that the player finds themselves in the middle of, but they don't even come close to having a believable sense of scale, or interesting gameplay for that matter. It's incredibly immersion breaking, and a perfect example of just how bad it can be is the civil war in Skyrim, where a war between two countries is being fought by a handful of guys, and the player is expected to just somehow buy it and play along. The Witcher 2 isn't quite so bad, but it still feels far too small scale for what's meant to be happening. Someone mentions how there's thousands of men on Henselt's side earlier, and near 1,000 of the defenders. This doesn't look like thousands to me though. The gameplay is also boring. You just kill people at a ladder in what must be the worst fight in the game. The siege looked more impressive in the other path when you weren't directly involved, and if the developers aren't able to make a big battle fun to play or believable in scale, I don't know why they don't just have it as something happening in the background where the player plays an indirect part. I also don't like the tone of this section. At the start you pour boiling oil on the Kedweni attackers, and Geralt and Zoltan start making stupid puns, but these are humans. They're not evil, they're just soldiers doing their job and now being burned alive by boiling oil. I don't know why that's meant to be funny. It feels so out of place. Partway through the assault you go to defend the mines against Deathmold with Saskia, and here you find out something interesting, which you never find out if you don't play this path. Saskia is the dragon. She's actually the daughter of Villain Tratermirth. This makes her more interesting, but only if you played this path to find this out. Yorvith also gets more development on this path. He's pretty enamoured with Saskia, but more interesting than that, he understands the Scoia'tael are doomed to fail, and is willing to relax his ideals and work with the dwarves and humans of Vergens for Saskia's vision of a free and equal Upper Edirn. This makes Yorvith a lot more interesting than Yavin was, despite the similarities. Anyway, after some more killing people as they climb up a ladder, Yorvith arrives with his Scoia'tael archers and you win the battle and the war. Henselt surrenders and Saskia uncharacteristically orders the death of Deathmold for war crimes, before walking away with Philippa. You follow to see them teleport away. A quick investigation reveals Philippa has used a spell on Saskia to control her, and you set off in pursuit in the direction where everyone important seems to be heading to, Loch Muin. The huge amount of differences between Roach's and Yorvith's path make replaying this chapter great. However, if you only play it once, you'll miss a lot of information, some of which is really interesting and some of which is pretty important. Chapter 3 begins with you arriving at Loch Muin with either Roach or Yorvith, before looking for a way to get inside the old ruined city. This chapter is a lot shorter than the other two, but there's still a lot of story. At Loch Muin, the rulers or representatives of each major northern country have come to discuss the fate of Temeria now Foltest is dead, as well as other pressing political issues. Representatives of Nilfgaard are also here to complicate matters, as are several mages who are seeking to establish a new magical ruling body known as the Conclave. There's a lot of characters to speak to here. If you saved Arian Lavalette, you can meet him again. You also finally get a chance to talk to some of the characters who you've only heard of before now, like Temerian General John Natalis or the Redanian King Radovid. If you arrive with Roach, you'll have a chance to investigate the disappearance of the now Temerian heirs to the throne, Anais and Bussy Lavalette. You find out Bussy is dead and Anais is in the hands of Deathmold in the Kedwenny section of the city. You're then given a choice to go with Roach to save Anais, or to go alone to the Nilfgaardian camp to rescue Triss. Either way will involve fighting your way through an entire armed camp. If you accompany Roach, you'll find Anais unharmed, and Roach will finally put an end to Deathmold. If you instead go after Triss, you'll kill most Nilfgaardians in Loch Muin in the process, but you will eventually get a chance to be reunited with her, and she's grateful for your assistance at least. If you arrive with Yorvith, you find out Philippa has been captured and is being held in the Redanian dungeon. You can either get arrested yourself or break in through the sewers. There you find the captured Philippa talking to Radovid, who has caught wind of her scheming and then has her eyes removed with a spoon.
You're making a grave error, sire.
Pretty nasty, but Geralt still needs information. After talking with the sorceress, you're given a choice of whether to go save Triss or accompany Philippa in an attempt to free Saskia from the spell that holds her. The former plays out somewhat similarly to before. The latter involves you meeting up with Yorvith again as you make your way back through the sewers. You get a dagger from Philippa that can free Saskia from her hold, but Philippa then betrays you and flees, leaving you to fight your way out of her trap. On your first playthrough, you may worry about what will happen to Triss if you don't save her. After all, by this point you've seen how your decisions have had some quite big impacts previously. However, not saving Triss has little downside. She just gets rescued by someone else later, and she seems no worse for wear or even resentful towards Geralt, which makes this choice feel slightly weak. Anyway, no matter whom you arrive with or what you chose with Triss, you'll still next head to the summit, where the rulers and mages of the north are discussing the region's future. This scene will be different depending on your actions leading up to it. If you kill Henselt, he won't be there. If you save Anais, then she'll be with John Natalis, who can then make a stronger case for the future of Temeria. If you saved Triss, you'll have killed most of the Nilfgaardians, and so they won't be present. And if you didn't save Triss, the Nilfgaardians will arrive with Letho in chains, accusing the sorceresses of using him to plan and commit regicide against the kings of Temeria and Edirn. The number of things that can affect this scene is great, but what happens next is always the same. Saskia, who is still under the control of Philippa's spell, arrives in a dragon form to wreak havoc. Sheila de Tanzaville flees and Geralt chases her while dodging Saskia's fire. You reach Sheila, who tells you Letho had betrayed the sorceresses, and is in fact working for Nilfgaard to sow discontent and turn the rulers of the north against the mages. Sheila tries to teleport away, but a diamond in her megascope has been replaced, causing it to malfunction. You can intervene to save her or leave her to her grisly fate. Afterwards, the dragon crashes through the walls, and you'll then fight. It's a simple but still visually impressive boss fight. Before killing the dragon, a cutscene will play where Geralt will jump onto its back for a sequence of quick-time events that I failed a surprising amount of times. The dragon takes flight as Geralt struggles to hold on, before she crash lands and gets impaled on a tree. If you followed Yorvith's path and got the dagger from Philippa, you can use it to break the spell, returning Saskia to her human form. She'll then thank you and tells you she only likes Dwarven Dick, so thanks for that bit of information. If, however, you chose Roach's path, you have a choice to kill or leap a dragon, but you never actually find out this is Saskia. Nor do you find out anything about what happens to Philippa. Both things are just skipped over, and you'll be left wondering what the hell is up with this dragon that keeps showing up. It's a great example of how the story works so much better if you see both sides, and how some things just don't work well if you don't. Not knowing that Saskia is the dragon makes the dragon feel completely random, and no matter which path you pick and what choice you make, you'll always lose something. There are always characters you don't meet who then feel underdeveloped, or plot points that are less clear. Anyway, with the dragon dealt with, there's only one last person Geralt needs to find, Letho. You head back to the city to find fighting has broken out between different factions and the mages. If you saved Triss, then the Nilfgaardians will be mostly wiped out, and so the mages have the upper hand in this conflict. If you didn't save Triss, then the mages will be being hunted and burned. You'll meet either Yorveth or Roach again one last time, and they'll be happy if you helped them or unhappy if you didn't. You find Letho in the centre of the city, and if you didn't save Triss, he would have done so for you. What a nice guy. You then talk alone. This is the player's opportunity to ask questions on what's happened. Letho has lots of answers that feel designed to fill the player in on anything they may have missed or still be unsure of. He'll tell you how he was the one to alter Sheila's megascope, as well as telling you of Nilfgaard's plans and how he went about carrying them out. Geralt recovers the last of his memories as he recalls how he caught up to the Wild Hunt with the help of Letho and the other witches of the School of the Viper, where Geralt then made a deal to take Yennefer's place in exchange for her freedom. Letho tells you what happened next to him and Yennefer after Geralt left with the Wild Hunt. He looked after her while she had amnesia, but they were later found and captured by Nilfgaardian agents. The Emperor of Nilfgaard then offered Letho a deal: help Nilfgaard with their plans to cause chaos in the north, and in exchange he would rebuild the Witcher School of the Viper and restore witches to a position of respect in the south, a deal too appealing to Letho for him to pass up. Letho is a great character. He's thoroughly grey, having no problem killing to achieve his goals, even the innocent.
I paid the monk who treated me a lot of orange to stay silent. Actually, it was only a loan, because I killed him later. Only the dead can keep a secret.
He's caused you a lot of problems and has a lot of blood on his hands, but it's hard to dislike or blame him. He's a product of the world, after all. A world with little place for a Witcher anymore. And that seems to be the main theme explored in this game. The world of the Witcher is changing, and in that change the role of a Witcher has been lost. They are not the necessary safeguard of society they once were. Urbanization and the spread of civilization has meant monsters are in decline. Even if the game's monster-infested gameplay might lead you to believe otherwise, monsters are dying out. It's an important plot point to the book series, and it's the reason witches have become so distrusted. They're less seen and less needed than they used to be. And just like the foes they hunt, witches too seem to be a dying breed, with the various schools falling into ruin. So where does that leave those left behind? Well, as Geralt and Letho have found out, witches still have great value, as pawns in other people's power struggles. Our protagonist and antagonist, both witches, are both placed into their roles reluctantly. The game starts with Geralt being on the verge of escaping out of the reach of kings and politics, of returning to the path as witches are meant to do, but he's too late. He was flying too close to the sun, but not because of hubris. There are simply too few places left where a Witcher belongs, and too many people wanting to take advantage of them. As a bodyguard, or as an assassin. Letho's path here has been slightly different. He's manipulated by a promise that things can return to the past. And just like Geralt, he finds himself the victim of this changing world. The Witcher 3 will show that it was all a lie. The School of the Viper will not be restored. It was all for nothing. And what's more, the 3 other Witches of the Viper, all that Letho had left and the only people who will ever understand him, are all dead, and they died at the hands of a friend. The Witcher 2 is, at its heart, a story of tragedy. The tragedy of the Witchers, a dying breed in a changing world. And this is a tragedy that doesn't end with them, because with the Witchers gone, who's left to save humanity from its own monsters? From hate and greed and ignorance. Those monsters who will grow fat from the chaos that's to come. When you're done talking with Letho, there's nothing left to do than fight or walk away. And with so much blood already shed, it's very hard to find a reason to add to it. Now you know everything that's going on, notions of revenge or justice suddenly feel very small and very empty. The ending cutscene will recap your decisions and expand on their consequences. Those consequences can be pretty big, but The Witcher 3 will also find a way to skillfully make the fates of most countries a temporary affair. Because as the final cutscene shows, Nilfgaard is coming, and with it will come war and ruin for most of the northern realms. It's funny in a way how the ending both focuses on your decisions in-game, giving you the sense that your actions mattered and had a big effect on the world, while at the same time making you feel somewhat insignificant. This game wasn't really your story, and you didn't save the day. You were just a pawn who didn't realise what game was really being played until far too late. It creates a juxtaposition between a heavy emphasis on choice and consequence within the game's design, and a main story that casts the player in a surprisingly passive role, like a leaf caught in a storm that never gets to see the forces blowing it along until it's all over. It works well. The player feels like they have agency and impact in events, but also that the world is far bigger than you, and is a place with forces far beyond your control. It leaves you wanting to see what happens next, and be a part of it, to fight back against the events you aren't able to control, and to continue to shape the world in what way you can. Of course, for Geralt, this was most importantly a story of self-discovery, and he will go on to have a big impact on the fate of the world, but that is a story for another day. Now we've got to the end of the story, it seems a good time to talk about The Witcher 2's length. At 25 hours, it's on the short side for an RPG, but the high replay value more than makes up for that from a value perspective. There are several consequences of its length though. Firstly, there's so much to learn, but not a lot of time in which to do so. For example, just check the journal and see how many characters there are at this point. There are so many names, places and things to remember that it can be a bit much. If the game was longer, it would have had more time to gradually introduce them to the player, and maybe less people would have trouble following the story. This also affects pacing. The story in The Witcher 2 is quite fast paced, which makes it interesting, but there isn't much time to relax on your journey. You start in prison, and by the end of chapter 1 Triss is captured, which means there's always a sense of urgency all the way up to the end of the game, which, when it does arrive, feels very sudden. There's also the more relaxed side to adventuring, where there are breaks between the action that gets a bit forgotten in this game, despite it being captured so well in the first Witcher. Outside of the story, there are also many systems in The Witcher 2 which can take effort to learn and be quite complex. In some ways it feels like there isn't enough gameplay in The Witcher 2 to support them, as a lot of your 25 hours playing through it are spent in cutscenes and dialogue. For example, there are 9 different types of bombs and 21 different potions, but when do you have the time to use and experiment with that many different things? There's a detailed crafting system, but right up until just before the end of the game, I only ever crafted a single thing, the Kairan armor, despite checking if there's anything worth making regularly. Do you know what I did do far more than once? Have to manage my inventory after getting over encumbered. Of all the crafting and alchemy ingredients I picked up, I must have used around 1% of them. There's an okay amount of leveling up options, but some of the more interesting ones you can't get until the game is almost over. For example, I didn't unlock the adrenaline system until I was just before chapter 3. Then you have mutagens and abilities, and I'd be willing to bet some players will go through the entire game without even knowing either of those things exist. Some abilities are quite interesting, like changing Ard into an ice attack, but many people won't even realise they have these abilities. Then you have the Persuasion, Intimidate and Axii skills. Do you know the more you use them, the more they're upgraded, and so the more likely they are to be successful? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, as it's never explained, even though it's something that's quite important to know. Saying an RPG should be streamlined is something I wouldn't normally do, and when considering The Witcher 2 from multiple playthroughs, I think it would instead benefit by teaching the player and utilising its systems better, rather than simply being streamlined. But on the basis of a single playthrough, this game could benefit from a bit of streamlining. At the very least, remove inventory weight. It's not something many people enjoy anyway. In some ways, this game feels more suited to being a story-focused action game than it does an RPG, and the RPG parts feel a bit tacked on. Length is an interesting thing to think about though. Is a shorter game with good replay value better than a longer game with less replay value? If a game leaves you wanting more, is that preferable to it lasting too long? It's obviously subjective. The Witcher 2 was meant to have more content, however. An entire location, called the Valley of Flowers, also known as Dol Blafana, was completely cut. Chapter 3 was meant to be longer too. Cut content happens, but you can't help but wonder if the game would have been even better if it was longer, and that could have been achieved if there was less content that changed between the two paths. Some side quests that are only available on one path are great, and some could have easily been included in both paths. Take the Secrets of Loch Muin as an example. I know it's one of those added by the Enhanced Edition, but this quest still has so much effort put into it that it's a shame it's not available if you choose the other path. This quest has several good characters, fun puzzles, and interesting conversations, including a great one with a golem that you can outsmart. It's got funny moments, it adds to the lore and world building, it's got everything, even this. This quest has it all, and a lot of people who play this game will never see it. It seems a shame. The different paths also lead to some parts of the story being harder to understand, and some characters being underdeveloped if the player only sees one path. Saskia is the perfect example, but it's true for Philippa, Deathmold, Henselt, Sheila, Stennis, Natalis, and Radovid to some extent. But in retrospect, having so different paths available is what makes this game feel unique, and it was its most praised feature at release too. Lots of games promise choices and consequences, but rarely do they have such a big impact on how the game plays out. Many games let you change the fate of nations with your decisions, but you usually only hear about it off screen or after the credits roll. Few games actually show you the impact of your decisions to the degree that The Witcher 2 does. The choices in this game are great, and player choice is one of the main things that make an RPG fun. And if you miss out on some great story moments or great character development if you only see a single playthrough, well, that's just because The Witcher 2 is so full of those great moments and characters. It does seem a shame some people won't see some parts of this game, but it's only because there's so many good parts. And just like other games in the series, The Witcher 2 has some of the best characterization in gaming. Some of the characters that are only really seen in this game are some of the best in the series. Take characters like Henselt or Deathmold. They're unlikable but in an enjoyable way, and they're definitely very memorable. Or Foltest, or Roach and Yorveth, and of course then there's Letho. These characters have charisma and depth, and at least some degree of moral greyness to them. They're fantastic, and The Witcher 2's story is a joy to play through, even if the gameplay can seem flawed. Its story makes a shift away from the more folklore-focused first Witcher game into more politically focused territory, but it succeeds at making its political tale an engaging one. There is a lot to take in, but once you do, you're met with a great story. One that leaves you wanting more, and one that sets up what's to come. And there is a lot still to come.
One tankard, two tankard, three tankard, four. If you're feeling badly woozy, barf your guts upon the floor. 5 tankards, 6 tankards, you look like a goon. Don't fall neath the table, tear your arse to the stool.
Square coins.
10 tankards onwards and your guts are like a stone. Can't even see a prick, it's time to head for home.
Audrin, stop fucking around and get up.